And this is essentially where my story started. I went to a very normal state school, just between Sheffield and Derbyshire, and we were actually a technology college, and so I had to take a technology subject. And essentially at this point in my life, I had it all planned. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a barrister. I knew exactly what university I wanted to study at. I knew exactly even what course I wanted to do. And so when I set off doing my GCSEs, they were mainly just to get to the A-levels so I could get the university place that I wanted. And that was all about to change. This is my resistant materials teacher, Mr. Stokes. I can't draw. And Mr. Stokes was fantastic. He was a real inspiration. He was probably my first mentor. And I loved being Mr. Stokes' class because we had a real range of abilities and he was able to really focus and get the best out of everyone. I'm sure you might have mentors or friends who can sit down and whatever the situation, they can find that positive, they can really get the best out of you, and that was Mr. Stokes. The one thing that I was totally regretting and really not looking forward to was my coursework. When I signed up, I knew I would be expected to do a piece of coursework, and for the past 10 years, the subject of that coursework had been storage. And as one of only 2 girls in my class, I was expected to design a jewellery box. And that really filled me with dread and bored me senseless. And I was dreading having to spend 3 months designing a jewellery box that I could have gone down to the nearest Argos and bought about 6 for. And it just really didn't excite me. And so the day that was announced, I sat at the back of the class and essentially I sulked. And my teacher wasn't like me, I was usually quite keen. My teacher came over and I said, "Sir, this is really boring. I really don't want to do this. I want a real problem. I want a real challenge." And I suppose this is why people get involved with Speed Plus, because they want a real challenge. Because this is what it's about. It's actually going out there and really starting a business. At that point, I didn't want to start a business. I just wanted to do something of vague worth. And so he told me, going too fast, he told me about his father. And his father had a stroke and he couldn't use the stairs. So he couldn't have a stair lift, but at the same time he was feeling really very limited. And my teacher kind of gave me the problem to solve of allowing him to walk up and down the stairs being aided by something. That was kind of the broad outline. That's as much as I got. And I kind of sat there, if I'm honest, wondering whether I should have opened my mouth or whether I should have shut up and designed the jewellery box. But I thought, no, okay, he's given me a problem, I asked for a problem, I'll solve it. And I started to go home and I started to look, and the more that I researched, the more I realised that there was a gap in the market. And this is what you guys who've been on the project might have done. Anyone thinking about joining the project, this is the first step you need to do. You need to research, you need to see what the competition is. What are people already doing? There is no point solving a problem that has already been solved unless you can do it better, unless you can do it cheaper, unless it's more simpler, unless essentially you feel you can do it better. At the time I didn't feel I could do it better. And I sat and I looked at all these kind of different devices that helped people get up and down the stairs, and very complicated. And in fact, I went home and I spoke to my dad. And my dad was an ex-car mechanic, now a computer programmer, and I said, right, I've been given this challenge. I have to design something to help people walk up and down their own stairs. And he sat down and he started going on about motors. In fact, he said the key line, it's not a real product unless it has a motor. I did later make him eat those words. But yeah, and he's sort of going all his books out on the shelf. I'm sure you've all had people that are trying to be helpful and maybe aren't helpful. And he sat down and he started going on and on and on. And I was sat playing with this little toy here. I don't know if anyone's ever seen one. It's like a metal stick, and it has on the top either a cuckoo or a woodpecker, depending where you're from. And you take the little bird to the top of the stick, and it like flips and vibrates down to the bottom. And my brother had one of those, and my dad's going on about motors, and I'm sat there playing with this toy. And I suddenly realised that this was what I was looking for. Because in my head, I had no idea of the sort of product I should design. I knew what I needed it to do. I needed to design essentially a Zimmer frame for your stairs, something that allowed you to be safe and supported, but it kind of gave you that extra support. And the biggest issue that I've seen is someone going flying down their stairs. So I knew I needed a really good and reliable brake. And I wanted something really simple. I didn't want a motor, I didn't want it using electricity, I wanted it to be the simplest product I could design. And essentially, this was my first brake idea. This was how I wanted it to work, using friction. And so the next day I came back into school and I went to see my teacher and I was like, right, I've solved it. And that's it. The stair steady was born. Except it wasn't quite that simple, and they're lovely shiny pictures that we put on publicity and things. In fact, this was what I submitted for my GCSE Existing Materials project, and my first prototype was actually a scaffolding pole and a block of wood. So essentially I just made a bigger version of the toy to prove it would work. And when I brought in my scaffolding pole, my block of wood to my teacher, he was kind of see his face drop. I'd see people's face drop a lot along my journey, where they think, oh my word, what has she done, essentially. And he soon realised that this really wasn't showing how my product worked, and that I needed someone that could actually help me make it. So he, I've done all my drawings, I had my scaffolding pole, my block of wood, and he took me to see Reg. Now, people see Back to the Future? Yeah? So Reg is a little bit like Doc. He looks very young in this drawing. Every time he sees this, he's very flattered. But essentially, he is like Doc. Totally and utterly mad, total genius, and essentially comes up and designs things. Except he doesn't do it in a shed in the bottom of his garden. He has a multi-million-pound engineering firm full of projects and boats and half-designed things. And I turned up on his doorstep with my scaffolding pole, my block of wood and my drawings. Again, his face dropped. And he was thinking, what on earth is she doing here? What have I signed up to help her with? And he gave me half an hour. Now, essentially, if you've got some good drawings and you can talk about your product, you've got to get your pitch down really quick, because I had this half an hour to persuade him. And luckily, I did. And Reg was like, yes, I love it, I think it's going to work, you definitely need this factory. So essentially every Wednesday afternoon I would head over to Reg's factory. So I don't know about health and safety and all those sort of things, but I'd turn up and essentially we'd make the product, the first prototype. We'd work out, okay, so this is my drawing that I've got, how are we going to make this actually work? And Reg gave me two really important bits of advice, which is what I would give anyone that is designing a product or thinks they might design a product. Okay, protect your product. Whether it's a trademark, whether it's a patent, whether it's copyright for design, having some sort of intellectual property is really useful, especially when you sit in a room with someone that might want to buy your product or might want to buy your company. Having the word patent on a document, I'm just going for investment with a toy company that I'm with, and we want £7.7 million. And the one question we get is it patented? That is the key thing people want to know. Have you started protecting your design or your idea? And then he sowed a little seed. He sowed a seed about starting a company. Now Reg is very kind of old school, and he was like, yeah, just start a company, it's easy, there's nothing to it. But he kind of sowed that seed, and I really wasn't quite so sure at the time. But he helped me, and my school soon started to see, like any school or university like to do. Like today, they like to show off, and they like to have competitions, and they like to share good ideas. And I got sent down to Nottingham to a competition called Young Engineers with my stair steady, and my teacher put me in a nice t-shirt and it said Tomorrow's Engineers on the back of it, and it was really cheesy. And I stood there and I smiled a lot, and I told people about my product, and I told them how I'd be going to the factory to make it, and I said I'd started patenting the product. And at the end of the day, they invited me to the finals. And they gave me a nice document, and on the back of it, it said, "Can you sell your product?" And I remembered what Reg had said about this company, about setting up a company to sell the product. And if I'm honest, what I thought at that time was actually, I could tick that box. I was 16. I could tick that box if I started a company, I could have business cards, they could say managing director on them, and it would all be fine. And I'm sure there are people out there who, there's little things when you start a business, and for me it was the business cards. And so I got out the yellow pages when they were the proper size, and I went through and I found a local accountant. And he came to my house, because I didn't have any offices, so he came to my parents' house, was greeted by a very giddy 16-year-old girl. Again, his face dropped for some reason. And I started my first company. And Jonathan is still my accountant today. He's managed to last the journey with me. And he kind of sat me down, and although Reg had been very blasé about this company thing, Jonathan was very much, the legal side of the company, how it was very important it was done right. He explained a lot about directors, and I realised, well, actually, Reg had done a lot, so he should be an executive director. Dad was vaguely useful, could carry things, take me around. I could drive at the time, he could be a director. I, of course, was going to be managing director. And then Jonathan, it's obviously slightly changed now, but Jonathan told me about the responsibilities of company secretary and how if anything ever went wrong, they would be the person that went to jail. So I gave that to my mum. She's going to survive much better than me. Not that I'm planning on going to jail. And I had started my first company, and the next day I ran to the local printers and I got some business cards, which are hideous. I still have some of them. And I turned to young engineers in my beautiful Tomorrow's Engineer t-shirt. I even managed to persuade a family friend, under lots of disclaimers, to have a full one installed in their house. And me and Reg and my dad turned up and we fitted it. We got a nice little video of my mum using it. It was like 101, and a little thing of it going, yeah, this is quite good. And I had it playing on my stand, I had all my drawings. And at the end of the day, I was Young Engineer for Britain, which it slightly veered me off the whole law thing. And I started to kind of be opened up to this whole new world of like business and engineering. And in fact, it was this woman here that was probably the first person to change my viewpoint on what I wanted to do. Because if I'm honest, I think I'd chosen law because I'd just seen some really good legal dramas. I thought, yeah, that was good. I'd like to go out there and stand in court and fight my corner. But this is a woman called Linda Sanford, and at the time she was Vice President of IBM. And she arrived to London in her private plane with a fantastic handbag and some beautiful shoes. And I was thinking, what is her job? What does she do? And she did a lot within, obviously, business and engineering. I'm thinking, okay, maybe there's something in this. And the next day, I was put on BBC Breakfast TV, News 24, 5 Live Radio, essentially as a young entrepreneur and an engineer, neither of which I felt I was. And I think there is a time when you first start a business where you think, oh my word, I'm just blagging. I have like some leaflets and I'm pretending I do whatever I do and I'm really just trying to sell it. And essentially that was me on national TV. And they played the little video in the background of Reg going down the product, and my dad was really proud because he'd done the video. And I had a bit of a dilemma because suddenly all these opportunities were opening up to me. And when I say opportunities, I mean more work, because an opportunity is essentially the chance for you to do more work. And I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I had everything planned. From the age of 13, I knew exactly where life was taking me. And then this happened, a real curveball, and it was a real risk. I hadn't planned this, I hadn't thought about this, I was studying the wrong subjects, I'd never done business in my life. And there I was, having been on national TV, people wanting to buy my product. We'd made one of them. You know, I was really blagging it. And I decided to take the leap. We all sat down, and I still remember that meeting today in my parents' front room, where me and Reg and my dad and my mum sat down and we were like, what do you want to do? And they all looked at me and kind of went essentially, if you want to do it, you can do it. We will support you, but you have to do all the work. And I kind of went, I think I want to do it. And I asking, like they wanted to manufacture the product and they wanted to buy it. They were all a little weird and I felt I could do better. I was very stubborn, very stubborn. And essentially we started Stair Steady with £1,200. And I started to work from my parents' front room. And I had a laptop and a phone, and that was it. And I managed to persuade, in fact, this is a lovely photo of that. This is about our third mobility show that we did at the NEC. And the first one, I managed to persuade my parents to let me have some of the money they'd put aside for university. And I said, right, I'm going to take 3 years off, but I need to launch the product. I need it to be a big venue. NEC, at the time it was Europe's largest healthcare show or something. And we bought this stand space and we turned up with the product and some leaflets we printed off on a printer and a little flat screen TV that showed the video. And as we walked into the hall, now I don't know if any of you have been to mobility shows or you've been to any trade shows, but essentially there's the first day where everyone like sets up. But they're not the salespeople, they're the people they pay to set up their stand. So we like drove into the NEC, we've got this stand, and we'd had to, Reg and my dad had painstakingly made this stand because it had to fit in my dad's 7-seater and be put up in whatever, and it literally slotted together. And we just, in fact, we launched the product with a new international dealer the other week, and they were like, do you have a stand? I was like, yeah. So they came and picked it up with my dad and had to put it up at this big national conference, and I was like, yeah. And they were very impressed, but yeah, it's done us very well, that stand. And we literally set the thing up, and I'd made my dad wear a t-shirt that said Stair Steady, and we were surrounded by people who were looking at us thinking, what on earth is she doing? In fact, one of the bits of the step, the wooden bits, my dad was building a house and he mixed concrete on the back of it. So when they kind of came in, they were thinking, this isn't going to be good. And then we managed to write to my school to get my sister the time off as well. She was 15 at the time, and my mum took some time off work. And this is Matt, who does our website. I've dragged him along as well. And we had an engineer who, like the company that had agreed to fit the product, they sent an engineer along. And as you can see, in fact, we were all dressed in the same outfit. Now, dressing a 50-something-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 15-year-old in the same outfit was an interesting shopping trip. But I felt it was important that, as you know, the sales team looked the way they were supposed to. And we turned up, having been laughed at on Monday. We turned up on Tuesday with all these sales guys and women in their suits and all that, you know, fancy stands. And essentially we worked out that Huntley's, who were opposite, had a cushion. And I'd asked the guy, like, how much did that cost? £250,000 this cushion was that on. And I'm thinking, wow, okay. Like, we were complaining of paying a couple of £100 for the extra lighting socket, like, oh my word. And they all turned up, and you could see everyone thinking, who are they and what on earth are they doing? We literally had a printer behind the stand, so we ran out of leaflets, we literally just printed them off the back of the stand. And the morning was interesting. Lots of smiling, lots of trying to convince people, and then the best thing happened. The BBC turned up, so they like news stories, and Nadex decided, right, this was the press release. I think essentially it said something like, young mental girl decides to launch products with no money. And the BBC turned up and they stood all over Huntley's stand and took pictures of us all, and we all stood there. And people started to stop, and you could, when you walked into the hall, you could see where our stand was because we just had so many people. And that was the point where I realised, actually, we have something, we have a product that's going to work. And it didn't just happen overnight still, we still had to do the show for 3 or 4 years before people started to really get into it. And we started to grow, and we started to employ people, and we moved offices, and we got better at making the product. And I think when you have a product, especially if you're kind of handling the whole process of it, it's like a spiral. So you start off and there's some really big problems and you solve them, and the problems get smaller and smaller, but there are still problems. And every time you do something major to change it, you get chucked back on the outside of the spiral and you get really big problems again. And I started to develop kind of the links with manufacturers and the links with business, and turn up to meetings and smile a lot. And I got to do lots of things in engineering as well. I got to go to Atlanta to the International Science and Engineering Fair, which is essentially like Miss World for Geeks. It's like lots of really fantastically exciting projects. And you see the hall is massive, like everyone just talking about it. And that was an amazing experience. And this is what it's about as well. For me, it wasn't so much about just starting a business and doing really well with it. It's about all the other stuff that came with it. So like, it was interesting to hear how many people had taken up the offer of having the poster out there. Like, these are opportunities. It takes more time and effort, but you never know who's going to see it. You never know if you're going to get to speak and meet. And in fact, that trip had a fantastic conversation with the guy that owns Intel, or did at the time. You know, these sort of things happen because you have put yourself out there. You got in that right space at the right time. And yeah, some fantastic things. And in fact, there was an event at Coventry with Speed Plus that my friend Carly spoke at. And Carly was one of those people that I met at an event like that. I went and I networked, and I got to, talk to people about my business and about engineering. And it's not easy, it's never easy. And Staffordshire was my first business, and it wasn't set up in the right way. I didn't have mentors. In fact, Business Link found me about 2.5 years into having my business, at which point there was very little they could have done to save me, even if I needed saving. My company was set up in a way that supported what I needed to do in my parents' front room that day when I started it. There was no forward planning. And that has often caused issues. In fact, at the beginning of the year, I split Staffordshire, so the IP sat in one side, and I created a whole new company with investors and directors in the mobility sector. Because everyone sat in my parents' front room that day had no idea how to sell or buy mobility products, which actually is a big issue when you're wanting to sell a mobility product. And I got offers to buy the company, and I got times, where actually, in fact, there was a very big opportunity to buy Staffordshire off me. And in fact, the fact that I didn't take that put the company in a very risky position. Very scary time. One of those times where literally every day checking the bank account, can this go out? Can I make this payment? Are we still in business today? And it got to the point where, in fact, I was going to have to go to a friend of mine, who was actually another business partner, and say, I need some money. I'm not going to keep my company going without some investment. And that's a horrible conversation. That's have to go in there and be like, especially as he was a friend and I had another business with him, it was like, okay, please, I really need your help. And he kind of said, I'm sure we can sort something. And I walked out of that meeting feeling this small and like I totally failed. And I got a phone call from the guy in Canada who I'd completely forgotten about, who wanted to license the product but couldn't get the investment, to say, you've got the investment, the money is on your way to your bank account. And I kind of called up and was like, don't want your money. But it is always this close, always. And I've started 3 businesses that were startups, and it is always that close. Whatever you think the plan is going to be, however easy you think it is to make that and to make it work, there are always issues. And it's about finding that plan. So with the companies, I have a toy company called The Drolls, which is very kind of early prototype. That's the one we're going for the investment with. Great team, great ideas, augmented reality apps, online stuff, toys that talk to each other. Steel TV is actually, it's more of a community company that me and my brother set up, so we train and take in people and do media with them. Essentially it was an excuse for my brother to buy a lot of cameras and lighting and sound kit. And that was supported by O2. And that was really interesting for me because it was the first time that I'd ever walked into a business where someone had given me money. And that was it. When I was reading about Speed Plus, I was like, I would have loved that. I had to pay for that. Like, how on earth have you managed to get all of this? And that was a bit like that with the Steel TV stuff with O2, because they had this whole scheme and this support, and they started up and they gave you like 300 quid, and then if you did well with that, they gave you 2.5 grand, and if you did well with that, and it was like, they're giving me money to make money. It's amazing. So yeah, I wish I'd had some of those schemes at the beginning of Staffordshire. And then the last one is Artist Development Academy, which is where I got some how many? Yesterday. So we take new artists and we develop them. My business partner developed Spice Girls, we would take that. Fortunately, Pim did a season on X Factor as their artist development producer. Currently doing Donny Osmond's album, hence the reason he was in. And we take new artists and we run educational schemes and we prepare them for the industry, whether it's production courses, singing, songwriting, or actual artists. So very diverse, but they are all businesses. They all have to make money, they all have to pay people, and they're all doing okay at the moment. It's always good. And today is about your story. So today it's been so interesting seeing all these businesses and hearing that they're at different stages and so diverse. And this is what I love about business, is everyone is doing something different. And it's so nice when you find a community of people that get it, whether they're doing the same sort of thing as you or something completely different. And it's about having that support and also that challenge. I have a very big number of my friends who have their own business. And we're a little competitive. We like to know, how's everyone doing? What else are they doing? But also, we come together when there's problems. And this is it, like we all support each other. When I was going through some really tough times, I had people to talk to, and I had people to give me advice. And I think that's so valuable. Mike, who I own a toy company with, if I have a big decision to make, I will sit and argue with him and say, okay, what do you think? Because he's been in business, his last business he sold, had a turnover of £50 million. It was a very big business. He's used to dealing with lots of people and lots of problems. And he's always a good sounding board. It doesn't mean I always take his advice. In fact, the first time I met Mike was at the mobility show when we launched the Staffordshire. And he was in just a polo shirt, and he came to the stand, and it was the end of one of the last days. And he told me later he'd come to kind of rip the product apart, because he thought it wouldn't be any good. And I was close, it's been a very long day, and he kind of came up to me and started going on about, why do we manufacture in the UK, why don't we take it to China, what did I think about this? I was quite rude, I was really cheeky. I kind of, had a go at I wouldn't want to manufacture somewhere where I couldn't see it being made, I wouldn't support the local economy and all this, not realising there's several factories in China that they owned, and essentially I dug myself a really big hole. And I got an email from him the next day, and I'm thinking, should have been much more politer. But he was like, I love the fact that you stood up for what you believed. And that's important. There are lots of people there that will say, well, you should do it like this, or business is done like that. Especially in the sector I came from, there are certain ways that things are done, and I didn't want to do any of that. And that sometimes earns you more credit than just going with the rest of the crowd. And in fact, afterwards he invited me to see around his site, and they ended up at one point saving me. I couldn't, my engineering, the company that engineered to fit the product was a separate company. They went into receivership. I had orders, no one to fit the product, and Mike's company was able to step in. So networking, being able to pick up the phone to people and say, help, I need you, and just generally kind of getting that network and that support. I will have questions in a minute, so I'll give you some time to prepare. But I'm just going to leave you with one of my favourite kind of thoughts. So, it's often quite solitary being in business on your own. But there is a theory that you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. So just have a think now, whether that's family or friends or business partners or employees, and think what those 5 people that you spend the most time with are like. Are they passionate? Are they always pushing you? Are they supportive? Or are they always trying to drag you down? Are they always looking at the negative? Are they always struggling to be positive about a situation? Because they are the people that will affect you the most. And then flip it on its head. Think of those people. You contribute to them. So what are you like with them? Are you positive? Are you supportive? Are you always, trying to help problem solve? Or are you dragging them down? Are you always looking at the negative? Are you never being positive? Just have a think about that. And if you're thinking, well, actually, lately, find it really hard. You know, it's just been so, everything's going wrong for me, nothing is going right. Maybe look at changing the people around you. Maybe start looking for those people and making time to spend it, whether it's an hour a week with someone that is inspiring, with someone that's positive, with someone that challenges you, with someone that isn't a yes person. And maybe in a few months' time,